Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, the politics, and the policies that drive Texas. I'm your co-host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And with me, as always, is our Vice President of Policy, Derek Cohen. Derek, how are things going this week?
A lot more busier than weeks past, I'll tell you that much.
It does feel like there definitely continues to be a growing buzz around Austin, around the state legislature for sure. Or it could just be because this weekend we have the Super Bowl. So, we want to get to all the issues. We want to talk about that. But I think what everybody is dying to know is, what are your Super Bowl picks for this weekend? Are you going to take the Philadelphia Eagles? Do you have a dog in that hunt at all between the Chiefs and some people look at Patrick Mahomes and he's a Texas Tech guy, so there's a Texas connection there. But there's also one with Jalen Hurts. So
right.
who are you picking in this game?
Well, I think that I speak for the soul of America when I say I'm stridently anti-Philadelphia Eagles.
Your Cowboys homer? Is that why?
Oh no, not at all. But my team, from my ancestral homeland, is the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I am statutorily obliged not to actually root for the Philadelphia Eagles. And it makes it really easy when they do things like assault Santa Claus and do all the other stuff that they're
probably a safe place to be anti-Philly, sports Philly anyway.
Yeah, we'll leave it at sports Philly.
And I do want to get to the show, but there was this controversy I was listening to on other radio stations. So we don't really talk about sports here, although we probably could. I'm sure there's plenty of political fans who would love to talk about sports all day. One interesting thing was Super Bowl Monday. Making that a national holiday and actually taking away like one of the other holidays, like maybe Columbus Day or something. There's already controversy around Columbus Day, and I'm not sure that anybody really cares necessarily to celebrate that one. But the day after the Super Bowl, perhaps could be a national holiday. What do you think about moving a national holiday to Super Bowl Monday?
Well, I'm definitely all for it, and whether or not it's the reallocation of Labor Day in response to the collective bargaining environment they've created,
taking away Labor Day
in the NFL, but whatever the case may be, I'm all for it. My one peccadillo on the idea, though, I'd say, is if you look at the folks that are complaining about Columbus Day, do you think they would not also complain about having a day that glorifies the barbaric savagery of grown men running into each other with helmets, or whatever they would say about that particular endeavor? I think people would complain regardless. Maybe it's best just target it at somebody that was
look, I think
100 years ago.
Any other excuse that we can have to have another mattress sale once a month is probably a good idea. All right, so that's enough of that.
Doorbuster car sales as well.
Let's get into. All right, so you're who you're taking. So you're just gonna root for the Kansas City Chiefs then?
Yeah, I'm pulling for Kansas City. I transferred loyalty early on in the playoffs to Cincinnati, who are soft second. Also, got to represent the AFC North as well.
Yep. All right. Well, even though I'm a Cowboys fan, I think I'll have to. Vegas is picking the Eagles. I think there's a lot of reasons why they're the stronger team, but you never know. Mahomes is crazy, so it'll be a good game. I think it'll be one of the better games that we've seen in a long time. All right, so let's get to the politics. Let's get to the policy and the politics of what we're talking about today. I do want to say, just as a matter of housekeeping, we do appreciate your feedback. We do appreciate your comments, however pointed or critical. So if you want to get in touch with us, we're both on Twitter, both fairly active there. At Real Bphil is where you can find me, and at Cohen at TPPF. At Cohen at TPPF is where you can find Derek. And we love to have your suggestions on topics, and if you hate our Super Bowl picks, or if you want to gloat because you're a huge Mahomes fan, totally a place to do that as well. All right, so working backwards, later in the show, we're going to go in depth on the pernicious practice of taxpayer funded lobbying. We'll talk about a little bit about what that is. It's been going around the last 2 or 3 sessions. It feels like there's a little bit more momentum this time. So we'll talk about what that is and the likelihood that we might end up banning the practice of taxpayer funded lobbying. In the top topics, obviously there was a State of the Union this week, so we had to listen to Biden for 4 hours and jaw boning back and forth with Republicans during the broadcast. We're going to talk about in terms of top topics. We're going to talk about the new, or not, I guess guess it's not new, but the announcement that Governor Abbott made in banning the use or the consideration of DEI, which is again a very controversial practice, very controversial program, but the use of diversity, equity, and inclusion theories and principles in hiring, either at universities or at public institutions and that kind of thing. So we'll get into that. And then also we'll just get into some politics of the week. There were some crazy things. The Democrats and Republicans are both getting riled up. They're both starting to lob barbs at each other, and so we'll dig into some of that. But of course, the first segment that we always look forward to is Derek and his Lege-land update. Tell us about what's going on up at the Capitol.
Well, I mean, we still have the Finance Committee hearings going on. Just this week in the Senate, they reached Article 3, which is education. Not only K through 12 education, but also the various university systems throughout the state. So that continued apace. The big items of note, though, is that we finally saw the committee assignments for the House. And, I know some folks who are, tickled pink about him. I know folks that are, despondent about him. I think the best summary is that the speaker done pretty well with with the personnel that he had. There are some really strong folks and some really strong positions, but the announcement came out yesterday, and you look at Twitter, and it's all this prognostication about, this thing, this is going to happen, or this thing's dead, before a comment was even made or a vote has even taken place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the one thing that just proves is that Twitter is not real life.
Yeah, of course. We just did a big poll and just got the results back this week, and I'm writing about it right now. And just as a shameless plug, we put out a weekly newsletter. It's called The Post. If you're not on that newsletter, there's a lot of good exclusive information in that. It's different than our daily email that we put out to Canon, but I'm writing a piece right now for that. And one of the things I point out is that 81% of Texans rarely or never use Twitter. 81% of Texans rarely or never use Twitter, which again just shows that it's really, especially in political Twitter, it's really just for the journalists and the junkies, right? Just not the real place.
19% margin of error, then, I'm guessing.
Yeah, exactly. But let's talk a little bit about, the committee chairs. Let's talk about that issue, because that was a big one brought up in terms of assigning Democrat committee chairs and all of that. How did that controversy all break down?
Well, you remember a lot of the discussion around that was that the appointment of Democrat committee chairs obfuscate or hinder Republican priorities, such as it was said by the party. And and while that can be the case, and remember, I think it was 2 episodes ago, I cautioned that it's much more of a nuanced situation than that. But what we have seen is that there are fewer Democrat committee chairs, but you still see individuals who have long time terms of service in certain areas returning. For example, you see Representative Canales chairing transportation again. You see Joe Moody chairing criminal jurisprudence again. Mm-hmm. And so it's more of a reflection, and instead of a partisan, you're an R, you're a D. It's almost seeming like that you really wanted to elevate folks who have experience in that particular area, because you don't want to start reinventing the wheel, starting from scratch. But, I think there's a lot there in those committee assignments for a lot of folks broadly on the center right to be pretty proud of.
And I know that our audiences are usually going to be political junkies who follow this stuff, but maybe some don't. And maybe you could explain to people why this is such a big deal. What is it about the Texas legislature and the process that make who the chairman is and who the committee is made up of so important to the success or failure of legislation?
Well, and this is not universal, but a good rule of thumb is that a chair of the committee, we discussed prior to that, essentially the default state of any bill in the Texas legislature is dead, right? And it is
despite the thousands and thousands that get thrown at the wall, right?
Exactly. And it is incumbent upon the champions of said legislation to steward it through the process. When going in, so all committees are defined by their ambit, what it is that they can weigh in on, what they can do, the scope of the committee. Even 2 of the select committees that were created yesterday, or that were established with the order yesterday, still actually has like discrete items that they can look at. For example, you just can't send taxpayer funded lobbying to transportation or something without making a pretty compelling argument about how that fits under that particular rubric. And so in doing so is all bills must go through a committee. That's just how the process works. It's constitutionally mandated. All bills must go through a committee. Now, if there is a committee chair who is hostile to a particular idea or a particular approach, the odds of that bill getting set early, getting due consideration early, getting out early, getting reported out and voted on early is, and I say early in relative context, it's far less. And it's not even unheard of, both in the House and the Senate, for a committee chair who is so opposed to a particular item before them that they just never said it at all.
Right.
And that's their prerogative of the chair to actually
Does that kind of thing prevent it from ever getting to the floor for the whole body to consider?
Short answer, yes. In the general process, everything needs to go through the committee. So if you have one bill in one committee that never gets posted or heard, then yes, that's done. That's it there. However, there are many, many other different ways. There are overlaps in committee jurisdictions. There are amendment strategies that we've seen executed in the past, both in the committee and on the floor, where entire bills have changed, and even still have satisfied the germaneness requirement for a single subject. And so that's really where I think a lot of the mental horsepower that's in analyzing the legislature needs to be focused. Not just, this one individual's here, they have an R or a D after the name, so that's a foregone conclusion. Because again, remember, it's, partisan affiliation is a predictor, and I would argue a bit of a weak predictor on what a person's voting and behavior in the legislature status would be.
And of course, the governor is going to be giving his state of the state next week, in which he will be outlining his priorities. We now know what the Senate priorities are, what the House priorities are. The governor obviously has been talking about the legislative session and in fact doing tour stops around the state, talking about things like parent empowerment. But we're going to get the official speech. We're going to hear what's really important to him. Any early discussion about what you might hear from that next week?
No, and like I said, I would be that's where I'd probably be the most cautious about getting out in front of just the governor on what he should declare an emergency item or what have you. Because again, remember the 60-day moratorium's up in early March, so there would be a couple week head start gain from some of these items should the committees take them up. But again, nothing needs to be declared an emergency item for it to get due consideration, for it to move fast. Especially it just gives you that bit of clearance. Again, the emergency declaration or declaring something emergency item basically says this is what the executive of the state finds important. And like I said, I don't want to get into prognostication, but just you mentioned the parental empowerment tour stops that we've seen. I think that the governor's leadership on parental empowerment on school choice issues is nothing short of incredible. I mean, he is putting his money where his mouth is, his political capital where his mouth is, and going out there and championing these. I personally, and I think that your polling, I personally think, and your polling substantiates that, it's not a risky position. Parents want this. Parents across the board want this. But he's getting out there and he's challenging the status quo, and kudos to that.
So you mentioned early March. So I will use this moment to do some more shameless plugging for a really important event that we have coming up. It's Texas Public Policy Foundation's annual sort of legislative event, I guess, not legislative, public policy event. We rebranded it this year, calling it Texas Policy Summit. In previous years, it's been called Policy Orientation. But we do have all three of the big three that are going to be featured speakers at Texas Policy Summit this year. So the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the speaker will all be there giving speeches, talking about this. And this is I think it's March 1st through 3rd. So it's literally right before the real melee starts in terms of legislative activity. Of course, we have tons of panels on all kinds of issues, all the stuff that we talk about here and everything that we talk about on our website, all the top issues from border security to education and so on. We'll have members on each one of those panels, as well as other experts and people who are affected by these issues every day. So again, shameless plug for our event. It's March 1st through 3rd. Most of it will be, if you can't attend, which we'd love to have you there, please RSVP at texaspolicysummit.com. home. But if you can't attend most of the events, I think all the events, we try to live stream as well. So if you're not able to attend, you certainly can still plug in and watch all of that. All right, so let's get to the top topics of the week. Some things that have kind of been rolling around. Obviously, the State of the Union, Biden's speech was on Tuesday night. And it was a little bit different, it felt like, than other State of the Unions. I'll get to some comments I have about just kind of the general food fight that happened. But, what are your early reactions about what you think, what you think that it says about what Biden's going to be focusing on the next year or so?
Well, I think that whatever was committed to paper and put in front of him and then eventually mispronounced from the teleprompter, I really don't think is going to necessarily mean that he focuses on it, because I've seen, this administration, I don't mean this as a partisan jab, but just as a simple observation. There's a lot more preening and public exhortation than we see a lot of coordinated pushes on any particular policy issues. You needn't look farther than, the already baked cake of the infrastructure bill and how much of a slog that was for this administration. So I'd be hesitant to say like how much it symboled or it probably symboled, hey, this came back in a poll that 80% of our base feel this way about something, put it in a speech. And so, when it comes to the State of the Union itself, I'm definitely more of the Calvin Coolidge, send like a maybe two-sided, two-page letter to Congress, letting them know what the State of the Union is. Because I'm not big into monarchical trappings. I'm not big into, festoonments and all sorts of, pomp and circumstance. But I mean, as the State of the Union being a 4-page PDF that's uploaded to the White House website, that's more my jam. As far as content, I mean, it was pablum. I don't say pablum because, I'm sure there's pablum that works hard, but some of the stuff that in there was just stuff that there's just no political constituency for. I'm thinking specifically on the Second Amendment stuff. He goes, "We're going to ban assault weapons," and that has been refuted not only in the research on violent crime during the assault weapon ban that he supposedly had passed prior to, but upon its sunset, we'd seen crime drop afterwards. Yeah. We also see that, there's this obfuscation on issues specifically Second Amendment related that, it'll say something that, at absolute curb appeal goes, oh, that makes sense. And then you just peel back one layer and it's like, this is a completely unworkable mess that has no business with the federal government getting involved. And that's the problem with this current, let me put it this way, not this current administration, but the current ideal of federal power extending back several administrations is that, here's something that is a problem, however defined. How are we going to deal with it? Oh, there should be a federal law. Right. Well, we should be asking, like, why are we even engaging in discussions on this at the federal level?
And that was kind of my first critique of it, is that it all felt very small ball to me. There were some things in there that I didn't even know. I mean, I didn't even know were major issues, much less federal issues. I mean, he's throwing in things like the resort fees and.
So you got in trouble with that.
Got some trolling by the people who were doing the lobby for the anti-resort fees, or like
big anti-resort fee,
trolling me on Twitter. But also, federal funding for hearing aids and stuff. And I know that these are like important things to the people to whom they are important, right? Like I'm not discounting that this might be an issue, but to rise to the level of a State of the Union, I mean, it just seems really silly. And so that was my first criticism, which was, this is the last time that he's going to be able to make a real policy speech. I mean, this time next year, we will actually be past at least the Republican Iowa caucus, right? And I'm not sure exactly when the South Carolina one is, but it'll be close. But this will be a political speech, a 100% re-election political speech next year. And
so it wasn't this year?
Well, they are kind of every year. But to my point, this is the one where you can say, here's what we're going to do this year. Here's the things that we're going to work on and get past and really do for the American people. So that next year you can say, here's what we did, right? Like we were right. We passed all these things. And it just seemed like stuff that, if next year we're touting, federal subsidies for hearing aids, I just don't know that's going to, play with the American people. So it really, it really felt really small ball to me. The other thing is I found myself finding it entertaining. The back and forth, the yelling, the reaction from the Republicans, the reaction from the Democrats, the president pointing his finger and yelling. It felt very late night political talk show to me. And unfortunately, I think that was entertaining for people, and I'm concerned about that. I don't mean to say that in a positive way.
Right.
I don't think that the State of the Union should be that. I mean, the fact that Republicans were the ones standing up and yelling liar over and over again or making hand gestures. I mean, I just didn't think that was very becoming, and it's only going to get worse. I mean, as soon as we have another Republican president, you absolutely know that the AOCs of the world and the loonies on their side are going to be standing up and yelling and walking out and making demonstrations. We had Nancy Pelosi ripping up the speech. I mean, it's only going to get worse, and I wish our side, the Republicans, had not pushed it to that next level. I'm hoping that perhaps next year maybe the good folks can dial it back.
Yeah, again, I want to sit here and I want to plug my trifold letter to Congress plan. We're going to make the State of the Union great again, and by that I mean again 2 pages in a mail. But that being said, I think you're 100% correct. I think that. And I mean, this is definitely an across the board indictment. This is not a partisan indictment because nearly all members of Congress can be painted with it. Congress has become such a clown show that even those trying to get stuff done there, and who I believe in the best of their heart have these interests, have to engage at least perfunctorily in the clownery. You know what I mean? And there's no alternative
to get any attention on their bills or to get any media attention.
Exactly. And this is the natural. I don't want to say this is the terminus, the natural terminus of our politics, because that's not true. I think it can get so much worse. So I definitely don't want to say that. But this would be. I mean, this is the public performance, the memification of Mike Lee's quizzical expression. It's just. I think you're right in that it doesn't help anything. And the one thing that I think is that it underscores, and this has been included in States of the Union going back, all throughout my political consciousness, is the movement from we are all Americans together. We disagree about X, Y, and Z, but I'm going to hit on 1, 2, and 3 that every American agrees on. The politics stopping at the water's edge stuff, all that stuff should be, fairly non-controversial. But we've seen in recent decades, there's essentially the split, the schism, that it basically is a split between, you're either with me or you're crazy or a deplorable or what have you. And you just don't see anything that calls us to be, our collective American, calls upon our collective Americanism. But instead you see us actually like, oh, well, my team did this. And if you're on the other team, this is the Charlie Crist, I don't want any Ron DeSantis Republicans voting for me. And he got his way.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
so, but that's the thing, though. It's because he essentially hammered the divide.
You get to a point that I want to make about the GOP response, which was widely lauded, at least on the right, was given by Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders of Arkansas now, and that she did an absolutely fantastic job, that it was Reagan-esque and so forth. But she did say during that, I mean, she really, she honed in on sort of the ethos of the Republican Party right now, conservatives. I mean, one of the lines that stood out for everyone was, quote, "The dividing line in America is no longer between right or left. The choice is between normal or crazy." So you're seeing that. I mean, you mentioned that as kind of, I don't know if you were trying to say it was extremist rhetoric, but it definitely is rhetoric that pits, the tribalism of your side and my side. And of course, we think their side is crazy. They think that our side is evil. And it's only going to get worse. You now have the official GOP response saying, this is about who's sane and who's crazy.
Yeah. And I'm going to push back a little bit on the extremist rhetoric, because I think it's funny, because if you were to ask Governor Sanders or President Biden, what do you think extremists are? Those two Venn circles aren't going to overlap at all. I mean, again, because it's such a solipsistic concept of what crazy is relevant to my personal politics, right? And again, I don't even chastise Governor Sanders for using, between normal and crazy, because there is a, there's a colorable argument that where the establishment of a major political party wants to defend porn in libraries and drag queen story hours and what have you, which even, again, to your own polling, are not these like massive issues in the public consciousness. Mm-hmm. No, you can say that's great. Now, that being said, I would still always recommend a much more conciliatory, voice. And I think that, again, I only watched hers once. I do think that there's a lot there that could be considered conciliatory. Mm. I would just, if I were a speechwriter for either team, I would just start backing off the divisive rhetoric, because the first. And you can mark my words here, the first party, whether it's the Republicans or Democrats, who determines that they don't want to live life as a minority party anymore, is going to win 70% of the country just by being sane.
Well, either way, obviously Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Governor Sanders, did a fantastic job in terms of delivery. I thought the speech actually was very well written. I really think it does strike at the heart of kind of where the conservatives are right now, where the Republican Party is in terms of how we see the future of the country and the dangers. She mentioned specifically border security, violent crime, inflation, and I think foreign policy weakness, which are sort of the four themes that we've seen.
And all very valid observations.
Yeah, so I thought that she really did strike the message really well, and of course this is only going to fan flames of her political future. Probably not 2024. She's probably not jumping into a presidential race just yet, but certainly she did a fantastic job. She was on a national stage, and it will only the call perhaps for her to run for president at some future point will certainly only be greater.
Now, Brian, I noticed you haven't ruled out a run for 24.
I have not yet. No, not officially. But
I cannot confirm that you're not running.
It's too early. All right. Well, getting back to Texas, there was, I guess it was controversial. I don't know. The governor put out a letter. It was actually a memo signed by one of his top aides, warning that any deference to what he described as, quote, forbidden DEI initiatives, DEI meaning diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, would violate anti-discrimination laws by favoring some demographic groups to the detriment of others. Essentially what's going on here is that the story is that there's an organization that put out a report on Texas schools on the various DEI programs around Texas schools, and the report highlighted the fact that they're one of the items that is in every DEI program at these universities are these what they call diversity statements, which essentially is just simply a loyalty statement to the far left radical progressive agenda, this worldview that is steeped in things like CRT and so on. But it's these diversity statements, really, again, it's just a loyalty oath to this worldview that is causing a lot of controversy. Texas Tech announced that it will no longer use DEI in its hiring practices, and people, of course, are saying, look, we don't want to surrender to the woke mob who can and can't be a biology professor. Particularly in the sciences, you need people who are innovative, who are creative, who are looking for new studies and trying to find.
Especially after we need all these biologists to determine what women are.
Well, that for sure. But and not just biology, but I mean just the sciences in general, where is a place where it should be about discovery and it should be about questions and why are we considering what your commitment is to DEI in order to determine whether or not you can be a physics professor. Do you think this is just more of the left just being able to highlight, or trying to establish that Republicans or conservatives are just, anti-diversity, or is there more there?
Do I think that the left is going to make hay of this? Absolutely. But do I think that, the whole DEI thing is, kind of a new pernicious development? Oh, not at all. Coming from academia, I can tell you. Entering the academic job market when I did, about a decade ago, you had to basically have a teaching statement that reflected these particular values.
A decade ago?
Over a decade ago.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
When I was, right as I was finishing my comps for my PhD, and one of the things that you saw is again, it's not that this statement is secured in order to promote diversity qua diversity. It's actually to enforce what is a fairly basically a hive mind that you have in academia, and
The opposite of diversity.
Oh, absolutely. And I will say though that they might have certain, quotas, to be blunt about it, or certain, other hiring considerations that would ensure superficial diversity. And again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but to do that at the sacrifice of actual intellectual diversity. And, I mean, there's studies that go back, that look at, partisan affiliation in higher education. That, I forget what the latest estimate was, but it's something like.
Well, they do the donor. You can look through the donations, and it's well over 90% of everybody in academia donates gives to Democrats.
Yeah, and similarly, that reflects themselves as self-identified partisan identification. It's like 97 or so. It's way up there. And not that I think that, what we need is we need affirmative action hiring Republicans or conservatives in academia, even though some departments of centers have taken that particular approach. I think what needs to happen is that rather than having these sinecures, which is what so much of higher education is, and, the lieutenant governor now is talking about getting rid of tenure, and obviously the devil will be in the details. I think that's a good start, but, saying tenure in and of itself is the problem is essentially pointing at a completely rotted tree that's about to collapse and pointing at one leaf and being like, this leaf is killing this tree. It's like, no, the tree is what's sick. And so that's what I think needs to be part of the discussion, is not necessarily what are some of the issues around the edges, but like, what is the actual role of state-funded higher education entirely? And that's not to say that there is no role for it, but if we're talking about, we make the joke, we made the joke back in Ohio about Ohio State's underwater basket weaving major, which is what, most of the football players had to take in order to be eligible to play for Ohio State. I'm a Michigan guy, if you haven't been able to tell. That being said, is what we would talk about these majors, and that would have absolutely nothing to do with, the vibrance of the state, the health of the body politic. These were simply professors who would get a role or get a position in so-and-so studies. They would publish in the journal of so-and-so studies. They would get tenure from their publication in the journal of so-and-so studies. And so this entire system that we set up to be this hotbed of thought and, of radical exception and all this focus on expanding the mind basically becomes the most cloistered existence. It is the most closed off, the most epistemically closed profession in the country, simply because we exist in an institution that builds its own echo chambers.
Now we've mentioned DEI, we mentioned tenure, and so one of the other big issues in higher ed, and we can go in depth on this in another show, but obviously the accreditation is where it really starts. Is that in order to get federal funding federal loans to go to a school, it has to be accredited. But of course, as we're learning, and TPPF is doing a bunch of new research on this, it turns out that it's all a big con. That in fact, the accreditation is really just a way to protect faculty, particularly faculty who want to push this left-wing radical notion. So they call it a cartel. And so we'll go into that in depth at another day on higher ed, because I actually, I think higher ed is going to be a big issue. This legislature. You mentioned that the lieutenant governor is very hot on tenure issues. Now the governor's talking about DEI, and I think there's going to be a big push to look at accreditation and kind of figure out how do we break the cartel.
We should do this, because that is definitely something I could just go on about. And once people start finding out about how certain departments are staffing certain offices or certain research centers at certain flagship universities, because I think their heads will pop.
You don't think this will this harm your future employment efforts? To just retire as Dr. Cohen someday in some obscure university, getting tenure and not having to be accountable for whether or not you're educating anyone?
Normally, I'd say I'm pretty sure that ship had sailed, but I'm pretty sure that ship had came ashore and was ordered smashed. So that Rubicon has been crossed.
So new retirement plans? We'll have to figure that out. Okay, all right. Well, in the interest of time, time. I do want to hit our this issue because it is a top 10 issue, certainly for Texas Public Policy Foundation, but it's becoming more and more of an issue over the last few years. You know, it's taxpayer funded lobbying, and what do we mean by that? That means, you know, tax dollars, particularly at your local government level, are going to fund private contract lobbyists who live and work here in Austin, even if they're, you know, representing small towns or medium-sized towns around the state. You know, they generally live here and work here in Austin, and they're lobbyists, and they lobby on behalf of whatever it is that the local government wants. Unfortunately, it turns out that most of what the local governments want tend to be against the interest, particularly of the taxpayer or even just the populace at large, and you know, and they're lobbying for changes at a state level. The new research that we have. The last time we ran the numbers, local governments had spent over $41 million of your hard-earned tax dollars on contract lobbyists. Now, 4 years later, or whatever it is, 5 years later, I'm sorry, in the 2021. So yeah, 4 years later, in the 2021 session, local government spent over $75 million. So almost double what they had spent 4 years prior. So this is obviously a practice that is that, despite the attention that's being paid to this, is not going away, and it's getting much, much worse. And so there's a big push by Senator Mays Middleton and others to try and get rid of this practice. What's your initial thoughts on, you know, the possibility even of eliminating? Because now you're taking on the lobby directly, and now you're taking, you know, money out of their pockets and food off their table. So it would seem like from a procedural standpoint, it would be very difficult to get past.
I will admit, a lot of my private lobbyist friends are not too terribly enthused about this this particular legislative push. And you know, I credit to Senator Middleton. You know, I think he said that it was the first bill he's filed every single session, and I believe that to be true, because I think he realizes,
going back to his House days,
that he realizes how pernicious of practice it is. And you know, we can talk till we're blue in the face about, you know, about the corrupt incentives, but I mean, it's so facially obvious. You know, when you have a lobbyist that represents a city council or a city as an institution, not the taxpayers that make it up, but the actual taking of those taxpayers' dollars and then sending them to the pocket of a municipal, or a lobbyist for a municipal interest here, you know, somebody that's office is right here by ours, is that is completely contrary to what the taxpayers actually want. And so there's a million, obviously the practice should be banned, but there's even a million things you can do, saying, like, if you want to have a taxpayer funded lobbyist, you're going to need to have a full public vote on what it is you're compelling law. Now, I think that's a good half measure. I think that the ban in and of itself is the needed measure. But essentially, you know, the practice, again, not to rehash, you know, what we've discussed before, is that you're essentially taking taxpayer dollars to pay people to lobby against the interests of those taxpayers. What do I mean? When you see these taxpayer funded lobbyists up at the Capitol, who are they representing? They're representing cities, they're representing counties. What are they arguing for? Against appraisal, or against any sort of cap in expenditure, cap in appraisal, basically against being told how to do anything different from the state, even though the state has to pay for most of this. You know, there's so much stuff that they argue against or try to prevent that actually benefits the taxpayer. Now, look, I'm not saying that every single community or every single taxpayer even has a uniform thought on what the municipal policy should be as set by the legislature. What I am saying, though, is to think that you have a democratically elected city council and that their will is then impervious to me as mayor, you as council person, you know, that what we want institutionally and professionally is the very same as those are the people that sent us there, that completely has not borne out. That is not, I have not seen one case where somebody has gone to the legislature as a taxpayer funded lobbyist and say, I represent this individual back in the district. They want the ability to be taxed, or the tax rate to grow up to 8% and not just 2.5.
And you talk about, you know, the things that are anti-taxpayer. Let's talk about a little bit about what the lobbyists actually lobby for. Austin's lobbyists push for higher spending limits, tax increases, more debt, reversing election integrity laws, corporate subsidies, and then, of course, a bunch of, equity provisions and so forth and so forth. Now, you might say, look, that's what Austin wants. Austin is, 75% Democrat. These are the things that they want. But they're not lobbying to change the rules in Austin. Right? They're lobbying at the state level to change the rules in the state. So they want, higher spending limits across the state. They want the localities to be able to take on more debt across the state. They're going to, Houston is pushing for gun control laws across the state. I mean, these are not, it'd be one thing if they were just trying to change what's going on in those cities, but that's not what they're lobbying for. So, and that's clearly not, if you look at any kind of, election or public opinion polls, that's clearly not what the vast majority of Texans want.
And there is no legislation that's proposed or has been proposed that would actually stop elected officials from advocating at the State House. I'm 90% sure, I haven't talked to him recently, 90% sure Kurt Watson knows how to get to the State House. He can jump on a scooter at City Hall and be there in 5 minutes. And so I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is we started getting into this revolving process where if you look at the individuals who are engaging in this practice, they are also pretty politically active when it comes to political donations. And you start seeing I'd say a vicious cycle of advocating for the ability to bring more of this back. The people that are doing the advocating, then funding the individual campaigns and so on and so forth, when rather than parsing that out, just having this conflict of interest eliminated, taken off the table is the way to go.
And look, you really have to get into the books in order to, and this is a really good point that I think there should, the problem is you can't really get into the books to find out if this kind of thing is going on. It's really just by speculation, which is, look, you've got a municipal government that hands a bunch of money over to a lobbyist for, in terms to lobby for them. That's part of their paycheck. Of course, those lobbyists can then do whatever they want with their money, which then they turn around and hand it to the legislators that pass the laws that they want passed and hand it back to the mayors who sign the contracts for the lobbyists. So you've got this money conflict of interest where, the mayors, city officials have an interest in funding these lobbyists who then use that money to then fund the campaigns to keep the mayors, and the city councilmen, And that's, again, I'm not alleging anything specifically corrupt about this, but that can happen, and it probably and most likely does.
I dare not say laundering, but wouldn't it be better if we had this off the table and we wouldn't even have to worry about it?
That's exactly right. And again, we're not saying that the county, cities and counties cannot lobby for themselves or lobby for their interests. You just have an employee be, your county lobbyist or whatever. Because if you have a county employee, then you're subject to more rules about transparency and accountability and where the money goes, and of course, and all of that. And to your other point too, it's just a silly argument to say, well, we need to hire these lobbyists in order to speak for us because we can't get to Austin or we're too busy to go up there and talk to our state rep. Which of course, if you ask a state rep, they talk to their local officials all the time.
I have never met specifically senators with larger rural districts. I have not met a legislator that if even, the county judge of a county of 3,000 called them up, they wouldn't drop everything to return that call.
All right. So a difficult issue. It's actually growing and more people are putting eyes on it, particularly when they start hearing about, the way that it could possibly be corrupted. So we will keep an eye on that this legislative session to see how that goes. With that, we'll close this episode of the Right Idea. We really do appreciate those of you who are tuning in, who are watching, who are listening on the podcast. And we will see you next time. As always, Sam Houston said, do good and suffer the consequences.